Today's Sober Friends podcast is brought to you by Lulu. Lulu bought us a coffee. She is part of Al-Anon. She just joined Al-Anon. She has a partner that had sobriety for about 2 years. He had to go back to rehab recently. And part of Lulu's Al-Anon recovery is listening to the Sober Friends podcast, which tickles me pink because I wanted to bring in some people who are Al-Anon people. And I'm glad that this type of recovery that you get on this show is something that somebody in Al-Anon who is supporting somebody who is in active addiction now hopefully is going to be in better shape is enjoying the program. And Lula said she's going to talk to her partner when he's out of detox and tell him all about the Sober Friends podcast. If you find value in what we do, we humbly ask for you to support us. Support us at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends podcast. All right, Steve, we're going into tomorrow yet again, third time. We're heading overseas to Australia, where I'm just fascinated by the brand of sobriety. We've had Ash Butters on the show, Maz Compton. Megan Webb is the host of She's Sober Sydney, which, Meg, I'd say you pretty much focus on a female audience, but the men can jump in there too, because men's stories are important for people. Meg, welcome. Welcome to the Sober Friends podcast.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. We've been talking back and forth over email, which feels like forever.
Yeah.
But we're here. I was fascinated by your story on your podcast, and I'm fascinated by this Naked Mind certification, which I don't really know much about, but I've heard about. So where do you want to start? Tell us about you, Megan Webb.
Alrighty. Okay. Well, I will go back a bit because it's quite clear to me how I got to be a big drinker. I didn't drink as a teenager, which is quite unusual. Probably the same as you guys over here. Teenagers drink. It's, right. Definitely back when I was young, but I avoided all that. My mum says I didn't want to go to parties where there was alcohol. So for some reason, I was a bit worried about it. My parents weren't big drinkers, but I always had anxiety as a kid. Then when I was about 17, it developed into a social phobia, which presented as shaking. So it was quite physical and it meant people could see. So I then had to learn how to hide that as part of my life, which is very exhausting, as people who suffer from that will know. And at 18, I did have my first drink and I realised it stopped the shaking. So alcohol became a medication for me. I self-medicated my anxiety, so it meant I could eat and drink in front of other people, which I couldn't do without alcohol because the social phobia flared up.
I think you're kind of skipping over something because I heard your story. You were really good in front of the public of being out front, and then all of a sudden you're shaking like a leaf, like out of nowhere.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed getting up in front of the class at school. And by that I mean we had some notices that were read every morning, and I'd always volunteer. We were at a Catholic school. I'd volunteer to say the prayer, whatever it was. I enjoyed speaking. And so it was just out of the blue at 17. And looking back, I can see that I was an anxious kid, but also when I've gone into it, there were a couple of comments really innocently made to me. Maybe about, because I was tall, and I think I started to feel a bit conspicuous and just a bit, I don't know, it must have subconsciously affected something, so that when this particular day I got up to speak, my body just started shaking. And being quite extrovert, it was the opposite. It was just such a horrible thing to have to deal with, because I still continued to be quite an extrovert, so no one knew I was going through this. But it was so exhausting. I ended up missing school. We have what's called the HSC, which is our finishing exam in year 12. And we had, most of it's written exams, but one of them was a speech, and I just couldn't get up and do it. It made me sick. I was so scared for the weeks leading up to it. I ended up avoiding it. I got 0. So that brought my marks down. And then it just became about hiding this problem I had, which anyone that hides anything knows it's exhausting because it's mental as well. So it changed really my future, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but obviously I think public speaking was something I always was there in the background, and so it just cut that. That was not an option until now. A full circle. It's taken 30 odd years. But so it changed a lot of things. And honestly, people now will listen to my story who know me and say, I had no idea. So it just shows how you learn to hide these things.
Did it ever occur to you? Did you talk to your parents about it? Were you doing this in silence?
I did. So my mum was really good. She didn't really know how to deal with it, so she got me in to see a psychologist. And he was lovely, and he was really helpful in some ways. But the thing now at school, if you had something like this, they would support you. And for example, with that finishing exam, I would have been allowed to do it in a room with just a teacher and a friend. They did not offer that back then. It was all or nothing. And so that was really disappointing from my mum's perspective to, they've put me through this good school, and to have that lack of support for that one thing, which brought my marks down quite considerably because it was the English subject. It would have been really hard for her to, it just wasn't known. It just wasn't something, that was as known as it is today. So there was no support for her. So I did have a lovely doctor, but it didn't fix me.
I have an 11-year-old who just had her birthday today. She has pretty severe dyslexia and pretty significant anxiety. And thank God that she's going to school now, because she has all types of support to get her past this. That is not the hang up. If it's something like a test where she needs to do it by herself or needs to do it verbally, we have that flexibility to do it. And it feels like a waste. You clearly were bright. You clearly were good at this, but it was this hang up that you had that's no different than if you lost your legs and the school wouldn't give you some type of accommodation to allow you to be your best self. Thank God things have changed.
Oh, totally. Because you know what? I learned it was a poem, and then talking about the poem, I learnt it. I was good at it in the mirror, and so it was, on top of everything, it was doubly disappointing because I knew I was good. I had a good project to present. So, it was like practice, and you can go out and public speak. It wasn't, I couldn't, I practiced. So that kind of advice was pretty much all that was available back then. And it just didn't work for me. And even to the point, I was at a girls' school, and we'd do some dancing to the hymns sometimes. And I loved that. And then around that time, I got up to do it. I was nervous as anything, and I shook in front of the whole school, and I had to run off. I mean, it was awful. It was just awful time.
Yeah, and those things live on. At that age, those things that happen to you live on for a long time. I've shared on this podcast, right? I mean, I've always been sort of this little pudgy kid, and they used to come and take me out of class and bring me down to the nurse's office and weigh me. Not just me, but any of the kids. Can you imagine? Like, no wonder why I struggle with my weight. No wonder why I have that. Like,
yep.
They thought they were doing something healthy. They would talk to me about exercise. They did it in the best interest, right? But man, it was pretty embarrassing. Oh, they're coming to take the fat kids out of the class,
I can't even imagine.
Right.
That is awful. We had a weigh-in day once a year. So I know I was, didn't worry, I was thin. So of course it didn't worry the thin people, but I have friends who say it affected them to this day. How horrendous.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, I get it now why, it's just something like I'll never be satisfied with my body type, right? Because of that, right? And I work on that. And listen, I'm 65 years old, right?
Yep.
And I'm active and all that kind of stuff. But I'm never satisfied. My alcoholic tendencies weigh on that also. But anyway, it was tough. It was tough back in the day when they didn't have the support that they have today.
Yeah, Megan, you had trauma. This is legitimate trauma, especially that's such a tender age, 16, 17, 18.
Oh, I know. Imagine doing that now. It's just so horrible. It's seemingly little things that they're traumatic. They affect you.
Oh, yeah.
As we see with us, but it's horrible.
So you found booze.
Right.
What was your cure?
The magic
I found
elixir.
booze. I found booze.
Right.
And, I guess from the beginning, I definitely was a binge drinker from day one. There was never a time I had one or two drinks. Didn't interest me. And I know up until then I was all or nothing with many things. So I was all in. And I probably knew from the beginning this was not a good thing. I knew what I was doing. But I managed because I wasn't drinking every day. It was just a social thing. All my friends were drinking. And that continued for years. Everyone drank. So you didn't stand out. I did, from the beginning, do stupid things. Like I drank till I passed out or fell over. Or it was just, I never had that ability to not cross that line. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen for me. So I was always the one that kept going the longest, and I don't even know how I did it. But yeah, so and then I worked in TV for a bit, and television had always been my interest. And I guess it's because I'd seen my dad working in advertising, and I was literally 4 years old and I went to see an ad being recorded and I loved cameras. So I got into TV and I had to do the auto cue, which is rolling the script, and that would make me shake. So every day I loved being there, but I was scared. So that took its toll. I never drank to get through that because I was only early 20s. Thank God I didn't get into that kind of bad habit, but I did look at all the natural therapies to help me try and get through it. And it didn't, look, I managed, but it was exhausting again emotionally. It just took its toll. It was just hard work. So then I'd get to the Friday and it was massive weekends of drinking. And looking back, I probably made my shaking so much worse just by then having to go back to work after a huge weekend. But at the time, I wasn't really aware of that because my shaking started before I'd ever had a drink.
Right.
So I knew it was something that I didn't think of it as something alcohol was making worse. And I then went to England for 2 years, drank my way around there as all the travellers did, the young travellers. Right. Yeah. And then I came back pregnant. So I was 24 and I had my daughter, and that I never wanted to drink when I was pregnant. So I didn't have a problem in that I couldn't stop drinking. It was at that point, it was just when I drank, it was far too much. So I had her and that was good until I started going out again. So, the cycle had started again. And I know that I didn't do the careers I wanted or anything because of this. So I ended up becoming a photographer. So cameras did become a part of my life. And I had my own business, but sometimes I found that physically hard because of the shaking, but my camera was so big, it was heavy. It was kind of okay. But I found it lonely because it was just me. And there's so much competition out there with photography. So I didn't have the confidence to charge properly. So, it was an interesting time, but it wasn't my passion. I just didn't feel I was doing what I really was meant to do. And that kind of went, different jobs, would come and go. I had my kids, and always in the back of my mind, I knew there was more to my life. That's always been something in the back of my mind.
To this point, you're really selling yourself short. That's what I'm hearing. Little parts along the way. Even I wasn't charging properly. You're selling your talents short.
Oh, my self-esteem was in the gutter. And this is the interesting thing about trauma. It doesn't have to be a major incident that's happened in your childhood. And I just had no self-esteem, not because I had bad parents, not because of anything major at all, but it changed my life because something that was probably, I remember when I was about 9 and someone said, let's do piggybacks, when you carry each other on the back. Yeah. And someone said to me, oh, you're too big. Now, I was a skinny girl, but I was tall. And that went in my subconscious. I'm big. I'm too much. I also got told sometimes, you're too loud. So pulling it all apart now, I can see that I always felt I was too much. And that's probably, nothing majorly traumatic. at all. But it made me sort of the self-worth just go down.
Yeah, I think I grew up with a lot of those same feelings. Like I always felt like
Me too.
I wasn't worthy. I didn't, I went to school and it was really similar. I went to school, I had got an engineering degree. That didn't work out for me after spending 5 years going for it. It's like, it was like, and all those things. And I could never figure out why, but it was the same thing. And every time I made something important in my life or hit something that was good, I never felt that I was worthy of it. Really until well into my sobriety. It took me a long time before I was able to overcome those feelings. And it's such a tough feeling. Listen, it's why I think most of us drank, right? I didn't want to feel those things. I was tired of feeling all those things of less than and not being happy with myself or my relationships. And what I did was, nobody saw that. Nobody could, just like you just said it. Nobody could see that happening to me. Nobody could see that happening to me. If you looked at me, you would have thought I was well adjusted. I lived in the suburbs. I had a wife. I had 2 kids. We had 2 cars. Like nobody could see that happening. But I was a mess inside. And for me, I just covered it up with alcohol, just like you're talking about.
Yep, exactly. It's just so exhausting. And you're right. I'm 19 months into my sobriety, but I'm only just scratching the surface. Yeah. So, a lot of people say to me, I don't feel good and it's week 3. I should feel perfect. It's like, it's a journey. It's a journey. I know, excuse me. It's a journey. It's like, it's going to take a while. Yeah. There's so much that we've bottled up. Yeah. Bottled in, drank out of the bottle, but pushed down.
So everything you've said to this point, if you're brand new, you stumbled upon this podcast, you're not sure if you have the disease or not, you're not sure, I don't know, or you're just identifying and you're hearing some of this stuff, I hope you can identify with the things that Megan has said, because, oh my God, it's like a lightning hitting me with the stuff that you are saying. These are the things. It's really not about the alcohol. It's about all this trauma and how you feel, and that the alcohol is the cure for that. It's right. The problem, but it's also the solution.
Yeah, isn't it? It's crazy how we take it on as a medication, but it's what's just going to make it so much worse. The one thing my psychologist back when I was 17 did give to me that I took with him was that he explained to me that often people that drink too much are just really sensitive people, and I really loved that. And I just look at anyone, because it's so stigmatized. Oh, that's an alcoholic. What have they? They're weak or whatever it is. But he gave me that power to be able to look at people and go, have compassion. So I think in the back of my mind also, I always wanted to work with this overcoming alcohol, even though I was in the midst of it, because I knew that people deserve to get out of that cycle and live the life. Because often we are people that have these big dreams, and again, we're just drinking it away because we're sad or scared or whatever it is. So
scare is a big one.
Totally. Fear's probably the underlying for many of us. I mean,
I think it's a common denominator for many of us. And Megan, we talked about early on that she does some, she'll be talking about it. She does some different stuff. Matt and I are both AA 12-steppers. And you just mentioned something that if you are, or if you're thinking about going to AA, there's a line in the AA book. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Megan. But it says, as alcoholics, we are a sensitive lot. That's what it said, right? It puts us all like, we are a sensitive lot as alcoholics. So, yeah, we have very thin skin, most of us, right? And we get offended and we get hurt. And some of that's our internal excuse so we can drink more, really is. Like, oh, you made me mad. You pissed me off. You don't love me. All those things that we do. I shouldn't say we do, but I do. And I've heard a lot of other people do that keeps us drinking for a lot longer than we should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I did go to AA. So basically my story continued with 3 kids, stopped drinking while I was pregnant and for a bit after. And then after my 3rd child, my son, I had a 10-year age gap between the first 2. All 3, sorry. So when my eldest was 10, I had my youngest, and then he's now 14. probably around when he was 2, I started to slowly start to drink more. And over the next few years, I'd probably slowly started to have a glass of wine each night. Well, not a glass. It quickly got to more because I didn't want a glass. So, and I'm not saying for 10 years I drank every night, because I didn't. It was a slow increase because our tolerance builds. And I was getting to my 40s where I was like, what am I doing with my life? So the easiest thing was to drink that away, because at that point I didn't have the tools to work out how I was going to achieve it. How about I numb it? So that continued until about 2018, I think I decided to go to AA. I have some relatives who have been to AA for 16 years, and so I know how incredible it is. I have no problem at all. I really enjoyed AA, and it was before COVID. So it was in-person meetings. I found my community because I was aware that I needed a community. And I really enjoyed hearing other people's stories. I just loved it. But I probably went for about 4 months, and then I started drinking again. And then COVID hit, and then, you know, things changed. And I did split up with my husband. Now that made going to meetings impossible because I didn't have him to mind the kids. He didn't have the kids at all. So things changed. So I started to look at different ways to get to sobriety again. And I read lots of amazing books because by that time there were lots of memoirs coming out. You know, it was getting to be a bigger thing online. So that's when I started to look at different ways to do this and achieve it.
Yeah, there's so much great literature out there, and that we have. But I feel bad that you fell off right as COVID. That's a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, it all happened at the same time, and I think we all went through. COVID then gave me a bit of permission to drink.
Right,
you know,
of course.
Give a lot of permission to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, one of the things you're not the first person, and it strikes me, Matt, and you might remember better than I, but we've had women come. We don't have a lot of women guests, but you're not the only one who talked about you read a lot of books and it helped you get sober. And I think that is something that I hear more from women than I do from men. And I'm not sure why that is. It's just an anecdotal, piece of evidence. But, like I said, when you said that, I'm like, oh, we've heard that before. And then we've heard it from a woman, and I can't tell you who it was, but it's like, yeah, I read a lot of books on self-help, and this other person I also remember said they're finding sobriety in another way, right? So it's just interesting that there is, and Matt's right, there is so much great information out there. There's so many good books out there today. Again, like we talked about as we were growing up in our grade school experiences, those books weren't out there, right? They weren't out there when a lot of people got sober, 10 or 15 years ago. But they're out there today. There's a lot of good books out there today.
Yes, definitely. And I don't know if it is the reason it's, it seems to be women, but a lot of the sobriety memoirs are by women. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's just what I found. It was just so nice to be able to read or listen to the Audible and go, oh, that's me, and to know you're not alone. I think for me, the bottom line is it doesn't matter how you reach sobriety, but that you have to have a community. I think that's, they say the opposite of addiction is togetherness. I can't think of the word, but it's, it is that community that has helped me. And luckily in this day and age online, you can have a community there. And like us, we can be different sides of the world, Yeah. It's quite amazing how different it is. And I think that's why there's more success in different avenues these days. But yeah, look, those books were my initial way in, and I just felt like I was listening to a friend or just not alone anymore. And that was just so helpful in stopping again. So I gave up for the last time. It was New Year's Eve 2021, and just before that in the September I'd stopped for 30 days. So you were talking about how I became a certified This Naked Mind coach.
Right.
So what I did in the September, so I did attempt again in September. This Naked Mind, it's an American, I don't know if many of your listeners have heard of it, but it's a woman called Annie Grace. And she's
a pretty big deal. I'm sure a lot of people have.
She is. She's a big deal. And her, she's very science-based. So it's quite a different look at things. Really, really helpful for a lot of people to listen, to read the science and go, it's not, this is an addictive substance, to take away the blame and shame. So I think that's what's the most helpful. But I found her being at home with COVID. I found online she had a 30-day program called the Live Alcohol Experiment. And so I signed up in August for the September one, and I think I stopped drinking on like August the 31st so I could do this 30 days. And each day there was a coach that came on live. And one of them, so for 4 weeks, 7 coaches, so once a day each week. And one of them was an Australian woman. And I remember her coming on and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to do what she's doing. It was just a really fantastic course because there was all the information. You then had that hour a day to have a live discussion with the coaches, ask any questions. And I really liked the methodology and it was compassion-based, science type thing. It really resonated with me. And so after that 30 days, I looked into the coaching. So I really didn't drink much in the next few months to that New Year's Eve, but I did sign up to become a coach and do the course. And I think in my head, I thought, this is it. This is where it ends. Have a little bit of a drink before, So I had about a week that I did drink again in that December. And then January 2022, our course began, and it was about 80 people signed up, mostly from America. There were 6 Australians, and it turned out that 2 of them lived 10 minutes from me. And one of them is who I started my podcast with. So that was a 6-month course. It was every day we were on Zooms, and it was learning all this Naked Mind methodology. We learnt to be coaches. They have, different things. They use something called an ACT, which is awareness, clarity, and turnaround, which is changing your thought process. We learned how to do that. And as we were learning how to do that, we were going through that. So we were working on ourselves. So it was a very intense 6 months. And then after the 6 months, up until about now, a year later, almost, we sort of had a continuation of the course. But that 6 months is where we got certified. So we became alcohol recovery coaches. So we work with people that want to either have a break from alcohol or give up, or, quite often we will have people say, and this is most people, I was even in the same boat, I want to learn to moderate.
Right. Yeah.
Good luck.
Exactly. Good luck. Because I know for me, there's no such thing, but everyone has to work that out.
You got to come to it yourself. I think that's beautiful of working with somebody who wants to learn to moderate, because maybe they can, or maybe they come to it themselves going through the process.
Yep. And that's how I came to it. I think it's obvious to see that, of course, people want to try that first because it's scary to think of giving something up. Now, what we do in our approach is I don't say forever. I just work on the day-to-day. Now, I know for me, it probably will be forever that I don't drink. But I don't need to say that, and I don't, because, no one really knows what forever is. So it gives people a bit of a freedom. But through doing our learning, I've come to the point where I don't desire a drink. So it's not willpower. I literally don't. And a lot of that's been learning or just changing my thought pattern. I can look at someone, say, on a Sunday afternoon at the water and go, oh, that'd be nice. And literally within seconds I go, yeah, maybe for half an hour. And then I'd start to have more or get a headache, and then I'd be an idiot. And the next day I'd feel disgusting. I never want to have a hangover again in my life. And you play it forward type thing. And so very quickly I can go, there is nothing in that for me. You know, I can go and sit there and have a nice time and eat some nice food. You know, I can actually appreciate food now instead of just worrying where the next drink comes from. And I do different things. I focus on lunch times, morning walks, brunches, rather than night things. And at the moment that suits me. I'll go out very occasionally at night. But I've just changed my social life to healthy, day, fun type things. I mean, you guys would know you have to make some changes, but
especially early on, like yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're 19 months. You have to do that. You know, another thing that we like to say is the only thing you got to change when you want to get sober is everything, right? And you do. You got to change those things. For me, I had to. Same thing. I had to change stuff. I had to stop associating with some family members because I always like to say, you know, my brother would say, hey, we're making pizza. And those were always just excuses to drink, right? Like, sure, there was going to be pizza served or somebody's going to make pizza, but that wasn't the highlight of the night. It never was. It was always the bottles of tequila that was the highlights. But so, yeah, that's, you know, and the other thing is if you're new, if you're listening to this, or if you're new in sobriety and you wonder why, you know, like Megan just said, you still occasionally think like, oh, that might be nice to have that drink. Well, you know, I'll have 13 years if I can stay sober for another couple days. Actually, for one more day. So, and I still have that thought. I still watch people drink and go, I wish I could do that. Or same thing, that momentary thought of, man, that looks good. That looks refreshing. That looks fun. All of those things that we do. But I, too, understand where it takes me, right? Like you, I had a relapse in my story, and it was very apparent after that relapse that I could not drink. It was very apparent to me. And so I don't need any more, you know, I don't need any more exploratory testing or anything like that. I know it, and I know it where it, you know, leads me. And just like you said, it's like it leads me to a place that's not good, and it's not good for the people around me. But I still have the thought. That maybe, and I don't ever think maybe. The other thing you said too is forever is a long time, right? Forever is a long time. I don't ever think that I'm going to be sober forever. I do think that I'm going to be sober today, right? And I plan on being sober tomorrow. But forever is just way too long. And if I try to stay sober forever, then chances are I may slip up and pay, you know, it's like, you know, not paying attention to the, you know, not being able to see the forest through the trees, right? Not paying attention to that stuff because I'm looking too far ahead. So that's really a good point that you made. Like, don't think about forever.
I love hearing stories of people at 19 months sobriety. And I don't think we have people on the show as frequently with people who are as new as you. When I say that, like 19 months, I love hearing this. I love to hear people who are newer than me because there's a lot I've forgotten. I hear them like, that's what it was like. That's what it was like for me. And I think for people who have a lot of sobriety, hearing somebody who is newer in their sobriety is more important. And it gives me hope that I always thought I was going to be the last person with alcohol use disorder to come through the door. And it's like, there are going to be more people who get sober. I'm not always going to be the new person. So, it just gives me such hope. What made you decide on a podcast? It almost feels preordained because you were going to do something in the entertainment business, but what made you do a podcast?
Look, I don't know if I say serendipity because it's kind of everything I've ever dreamed of without knowing. And so when I met Bella, who I do the podcast with, we were doing the course together. And she actually said, who wants to do a podcast? And I'm like, me. Of course, that's just a given. So it came from there. And interestingly, when I think back, I was interested in things like radio. And so to me, it's this full circle. And I can honestly say it's my passion, my purpose. I mean, all of it, including the coaching. But the podcast is the thing that excites me the most. And I feel like somehow, maybe divine intervention, I don't know. But also maybe just subconsciously, it's happened because I've thought about it forever, you know, and maybe this is finally giving up alcohol has opened up my chance to do the things I've always wanted.
Right.
And a few years ago, I'd never listened to a podcast. But, well, it was probably when podcasts were beginning, and I had a lot of friends saying, you should listen to this podcast or that. And I'm like, what's a podcast? But it is so much fun. And it's, so ours is She's Sober Sydney. And it originally was, you know, we're two women living in Sydney, but we definitely want men to want to listen. We're actually sort of tossing up maybe a name change just to invite more people, because it's, yes, we're two females, but it's universal. Like you know, we've talked about today these things, and we want people to think, you know, oh, this is for me too, and just have a listen and feel like we're very casual, so it's like friends. That's what we were attracted to, listening to people that were like our friends. And
two of you have amazing chemistry. You are fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah,
it does sound like two old friends just sitting around talking.
Yeah, thank you. And it's so nice because we only met, I can't even think of where we are now. Oh, gosh, we're halfway through 2023. So a year and a half ago we met.
That's astounding.
Wow, that is.
That is not how I would guess listening to the show. It's like you've known each other forever. That's astounding that you clearly have made that connection in such a short period of time.
Yeah, and it is. So that's when I look at the serendipity, like a fortunate accident. But I feel like with the podcast, here today, I spoke to someone in another part of America the other day who I'd never met. All the guests we've had on, it's like, how amazing is that? Connecting with all these people we never would have met in our life over podcast, and we've got this thing in common that makes it like we've known each other for a long time. It's just sometimes I stop and think, oh, this is amazing. You know, how did this happen? Very lucky.
It is amazing. I'm still astounded when Matt reaches out and tells us some of the statistics of who's listening, and we find out that there's people in England, and we've had people from England, you know, there's people in Denmark, there's people in here, there's people in South America. You know, we're doing, you know, one of the things you saw me, I was distracted. My daughter, we mentioned my daughter's in New Zealand right now, so she just texted me the picture like, hey, we got great seats, and I'm like, hey, how about this? We're doing a podcast with somebody from Australia right at this moment. So anyway, so it's pretty funny, but we get to meet all these people, and to think that we could sit, I'm in my house and Matt's in his house and you're in Australia, but people all over the world can listen to this and get something out of it, right? Matt and I do this just like you. We do this every week pretty much, and we put it out there not knowing who's going to listen to it. And we get enough feedback that somebody's listening and it's helping somebody, which brings us back to do it again next week, right? Because I know for me, just like you said something very important. We talk about it all the time on this podcast. You need to find your community. Yeah. Okay. Matt and I found our community in AA. Other people find it elsewhere. Okay. But you need to find that community, because if you're a true alcoholic, if you're truly struggling with alcohol, it's almost impossible to get sober on your own. It really is. I know very few people who've been able to do it, and you're much better off to have someone, because you're going to have dark days. You're going to have trouble. You need somebody to talk to. You need somebody to call up and go, hey, I'm having a shitty day, and be able to talk you off that ledge and talk you out of having that drink. There will come a time that you're going to need that help.
Steve was away last week, so we had Jill Teets on from Sober Powered, and I was fascinated by her living a sober powered life community that she's created. And you're bringing in something, there is that commonality. It may be a different method, but the commonality is everything has a community. And you need it. If you were going to get sober by yourself, you would have done it already. You need another person, regardless of what the method is. If you can do it with another person or people, you are more likely to be successful, however you want to name it.
And we've got some new groups in Australia. It's called Untoxicated, and they have social nights. And so I went out to dinner recently with a group of them, and I don't mind at all socializing with people if they want to drink. but no one drinks at these things. And it's just refreshing and it's nice.
Yeah.
And the conversation's different, and it just makes you see that in your city there's other people, again, that you never would have met. But really helpful and helpful to everyone that goes.
The other thing that we find, and I know I found, is that you start to realize, when I was drinking, I thought everybody drank like I drink, or similarly, right? I thought, oh, everybody drinks. And, again, that was another way that I kept myself drinking way past what was acceptable limits in for much longer than I should have. And then when we stop drinking and we really have some time, we start to see that most people actually don't drink the way we drink. Right? I can remember going to weddings and watching like family members go, oh, that used to be me. Like that used to be me looking like that at a wedding, But most people are just having their one or two drinks or not at all. And they're acting normal, right? So that's the difference. Now I could see it today. Same thing. I mean, I don't mind people going out drinking. Most of my family, but when they come over, they're drinking normal. They have a drink. They have a beer. They have a couple drinks. We talk about it. Matt and I talk it all the time. My wife drinks. My wife can get up from going out to dinner and leave a half a glass of wine on the table, which still pisses me off. Which still pisses me off to this day.
Yeah.
And I blame it on the fact that we paid for it, but that's not really why it bothers me. It's because she didn't finish it, and I don't understand it. There's no way. I don't understand it. I could never leave a half glass of wine anywhere. So, yeah. So
exactly.
It's
and that's
different.
that's why community is so important, because I can say to my friend who's stopped drinking, how can they leave that half a glass? Oh my God. And you've got someone that understands it.
Right.
Because the person drinking that half a glass doesn't understand it,
Absolutely.
So we need the person. I went out to a lunch recently and I said, no one's ordered alcohol. I said, this is weird. And then someone did order a glass of champagne, and I just thought, I wish someone was here that I could say to, what the? One glass? And then they're going and driving home and not having more. I'd be driving past a bottle shop. And
that bottle is carbonated, so you can't do anything with that bottle. You can't put it back away. You might as well just drink it all.
Exactly. It's just people that don't drink just don't get that, but gosh, it irritates me.
Nope, they don't. They don't. And it's funny, and I look at it and laugh today at myself. I laugh at myself when I see people act that way, and I go, I don't get it. I don't get it. So, but that just reminds me. And when that happens to me, it reminds me that I'm the alcoholic, right? It's my problem. It's not their problem. It's my problem, and that's just a regular reminder. That the reason why they can have that drink and I can't is because they're able to leave it and I can't leave it.
Exactly.
What is the drinking culture like in Australia? You had a male guest on, and I'm remembering this allows me to hit all this thing that I'm interested in about Australia. So one, in my mind, Australia is like, it might as well be on another planet. To me, in my mind, it is this most exotic place that's isolated. And then your guest was from Perth. And to my mind, Perth is the most isolated and exotic place on the most isolated and exotic place. Because if I look at a map, there's Perth, but there's really nothing around it, but nothingness. And he talked about, in Australia, there's this drinking culture. Is there like some type of drinking culture that's different in Australia?
I don't know if it's different. I mean, because I've met people now from all over the world, as you have, but also doing my course. And to me, some people will say, like, for example, Ireland has the biggest drinking culture. And somehow, and Australia can be compared to that. But like I lived in England for a while and I worked in a pub. And there was a massive drinking culture there. But so I don't really know if it's worse, but some people will say it is. I think I haven't been around it for a while, so I do know younger people are drinking less statistically. Mm-hmm. Yes. I have two daughters. One's 25, one's 17. They're not drinkers, touch wood. They choose not to be. So things are changing. But if you go down to, say, Manly on the beach on a weekend, everyone's drinking. Right. Back when I was a big drinker, as far as I could see, everyone was a big drinker. And yes, like we've said, everyone wasn't. But there are a lot of clubs and pubs and people are getting kicked out for drinking. Everything does involve alcohol. You know, we're big on barbecues here. Come around for a barbie, always alcohol. Everything always involves alcohol.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if that's different to anywhere else. I think everywhere is like that.
I think those places attract the drinkers. It's not that there's the culture. I mean, beach places, that's where drinkers go to drink.
Exactly. You find what you need to enable you to continue that lifestyle, and I certainly found it. And so I can say there was a huge drinking culture, but now I don't. I can go out and go, oh, they're leaving, and they're going home. They're not drinking. So I guess it's what you're around or what you are aware of. And big drinkers are going to be aware of that big drinking culture.
And again, I think that's why we talk about if you're looking for sobriety, if you're looking to change on how alcohol is impacting your life, you do have to make some changes. You have to change that view, right? You have to change that view. You know, Matt has this great thing he talks about it. There's a fellow that he knows better than I, but he said it's like viewing the summit of a mountain. You know, you can be on multiple sides of that mountain and you're all looking at the same summit, but it's a different view. And that's what you need to do with your life after you start, you know, looking for sobriety. Like, you have a view and it's a lot of alcohol. Like, we find our community with the alcohol still, right? I found my community not only when I got sober, I had a community when I was drinking. Like, I knew the people, I knew where to go, I knew where the people would be that I would know. I could have a good time and drink. So we find that community too. So you have to change that, or else it's going to be very, very hard to stay sober.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a big football culture here, and I do know that I haven't been to the footy much. It's not my thing, but I certainly could go occasionally in the past and drink a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And people might say it's all alcohol, but my son now goes. They're not drinking. So he's 14. So there were always people that didn't.
Right.
So again, yes, you're seeing the part that you want to see or you're surrounded by.
Right. Yep.
Well, that's sports in the United States too. People go to sports in the United States and they get hammered. I think it's, that's just where people with drinking problems go.
Yes.
It's not that they are drinking events.
Exactly. I do find it disturbing that a lot of sports events advertise a lot of alcohol, and I know there are some changes happening, and I think that's disturbing for the younger people to see that. You know, thankfully they got rid of the cigarette advertising, but ultimately I think if you're never going to be a big drinker, you're not going to go to sport and start being a drinker. Like, yeah. So it just depends.
Yeah, and I understand why Budweiser advertises there. That's where their audience is.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. They'll make the money. So
these are where the power users are. Let's go get some of the action. Megan Webb is one of the co-hosts of She's Sober Sydney. How do we find you?
Well, you can find She's Sober Sydney on Google, Apple, Spotify, and you can find me personally. I have a website, glassfulfilled.com.au, and there's my story there. You can contact me. But yeah, jump on your where your podcasts are and have a look for us, because we are all over the world, even though it's says Sydney. And men, please come and have a listen. We do have male guests, and we've had some great guests that will appeal to everyone.
If you didn't write that down, I'm going to put it in the podcast notes. You'll see it there. You'll just be able to click on it so you can connect with Megan. I think the big story here, you're a third Australian guest along with Maz Compton and Ash Butters, is the story is doesn't matter what your borders are, what part of the world you're in, this alcohol thing cuts across it, and that commonality is enough that we have something to talk about and something to be friends over, even on the other side of the planet, because that one thing is enough to have a commonality. Megan Webb, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me. It's just been really wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, it has.
Great time.
And we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast. Consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.